I was reading in the newspaper earlier last week that they're looking at a potential cure through vaccines that were originally intended for the polio difficulty, as they consider a cure for the coronavirus. And when I heard this, my mind went to Assisi, because at the Sacro Convento, or the Holy Convent there at the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, there's a courtyard. And this courtyard was frequented for quite some time by Johannes Salk, who is the founder of the cure for polio. When he was having some difficulty in his own life and in his own research, he went to Assisi for a prolonged retreat just to clear his head. And he credits the lines in the architecture in our courtyard there of helping him to think in a way that he never thought before. Those lines in their beauty spoke to his heart and opened up a path of imagination and thought that he had not yet explored or even thought occurred or existed in the world. And through that path, he found the cure for polio. One day I was walking in that courtyard, and a friar came up to me and he said, "I know it's last minute, but would you like to go to another town just a little further south called Spello?" And it was the Saturday evening before the feast of Corpus Christi, the body and the blood of the Lord. And I said, "Why are you going to Spello tonight?" And he goes, "Because tomorrow they're going to have a Eucharistic procession through the small medieval town, and it winds through all the streets, and the people spend the whole night before preparing a carpet made of flower petals. And they have all these intricate designs, and then the bishop has the Eucharist and the monstrance, and there's a big procession through town to the cathedral, and a massive blessing and a big mass and everything else." And he said, "I want to go see him make the carpet of flowers and talk to the folks." So I got into the car and off we went to Spello. And it was an amazing thing to see. And we got to this one section that a group of kids were doing, ages around maybe 10, 12 years old. And I went up to this one kid and I said to him, "This is beautiful. What part did you do?" He looked up at me and he goes, "We did it all," pointing at his friends. I says, "Well, I know you did it all, but what part did you do? It's beautiful. Which part was yours?" And he looked at me like I was an unreasonable American who obviously was not understanding his Italian, and in very slow, loud words in Italian, he says to me, "We did it all." And the friar came over to me and he said, "The difficulty isn't the Italian, the difficulty is the culture." And he pointed out to me that I came from a very American perspective, where the I is always of most importance, not the we. And this young kid taught me what it truly means to be community. The I doesn't get lost in the we, but it also isn't lifted up so that the bigger picture and the beauty of all the parts coming together to make something beautiful is what's held up and not lost. We. A proper understanding of we, in the way that this youngster from Spello taught me on that eve of the Feast of Corpus Christi some 20-some years ago, is the cure to the American pandemic of an overemphasis on, and even obsession at times, of the I. For us Catholics, Eucharist is an essential part of this cure, for Eucharist is always about the we. When we eat this bread, when we drink this cup, we proclaim your death, O Lord. Eucharist makes sense only in the context of the Christian community. To put it in the words of my young teacher in Spello, we celebrate Mass together. We all do Eucharist. We all are Eucharist together. With the pandemic of COVID, there is a desire that I think is good and right that's welling up inside of Catholics around the world. It's the desire for Eucharist. Lay Catholics feel like the Israelites in the desert that we heard about in today's first reading, where God let them feel hunger so that they would come to appreciate and long for all the more Eucharist, manna that came down from heaven, the bread that fed the Israelites, the Eucharist that feeds God's people today. And that we would also come, like the Israelites, to realize, as we heard in that reading from Deuteronomy, that we must also learn to rely on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Last winter, there was held in Rome a synod on the Amazon, a place where folks go for months and even years without the Eucharist. Now, Catholics around the globe are flooding bishops' offices with a very particular request. I want to receive communion. When are you going to open your churches again? And this is happening only 1, 2, or 3 months into the time of COVID. This might be a good time for all of us to take a moment and to step back, and with a larger context, reflect on 2 things. First, how might we place ourselves in a greater solidarity with those in remote places, from the rainforests of the Amazon to the mountains of Appalachia, where people regularly go without Eucharist for months on end? Do we see a lack of access to the Eucharist as a suffering that is just personal? Or can we unite this suffering and this good desire that we feel inside ourselves, that's natural and good and right, can we unite that to those who have always experienced this suffering of such a removal from Eucharist? And secondly, let us take to heart today the phrases that we choose, each one of us, to express a longing for the Eucharist. Is it, I want to be able to receive communion? Or perhaps we should rephrase it with the help of my young teacher from Spello. Having been separated from Eucharist, my desire is to come together with my Christian family so that together we can eat this bread until the Lord comes again. My sisters and brothers, we is vaccine for us to truly be a Eucharistic people and refocus from the I to the we. For those of you who are watching this streamed Mass, who still cannot gather with us physically to receive Eucharist, know that you are in a holy place, with the Lord ever close, like our ancestors who roamed so long ago in that desert. In the desert, deprived as you are from Eucharist, the bread that is here at this altar, remember that your strength comes from every word that comes from the mouth of God, as that same reading from Deuteronomy reminds us, which tells us also that word of God, that always we are Eucharist together. The American poet Maya Angelou tells about her grandmother, Mama, she calls her. Maya describes her saying this: she was a tall, cinnamon-colored woman with a deep, soft voice who seemed to be standing thousands of feet up in the air on nothing visible. Maya's active imagination growing up. She goes on to say, each time Mama drew herself up to her full 6 feet, she would clasp her hands behind her back and look up into a distant sky and say, I will step out onto the Word of God. Together, let's reword this phrase with the help of my friend from Spello as a way for us to become Eucharist today, the Word made flesh, that each and every day we may find a moment to rise up to our full stature clasp our hands behind our backs, and look up into a distant sky and say, we will step out into the Word of God, all of us together.